David.
For David.
Surgery.
David. Yeah.
David.
Got a lot of Davids around here.
Sorry. Tell Valerie too.
Yeah. So David Raphael, Alicia's sister's husband, has a tumor on his pituitary gland. He's going in for brain surgery
On Monday.
tomorrow.
Yeah. Found out it was bleeding, and so, which is super common, I don't think it's common. And so they do it.
Nancy had surgery Thursday or Friday.
Right.
And so I'm sure she could use our prayers. And of course,
Do we know how she's doing?
I have not talked to her since, I think Thursday night. And of course, you are, and y'all.
Anything else we need to be praying for? Okay. Dear Lord, we're so thankful to be here. We are glad that we can come around your word, to slow down during the week and to study it. As we do that, Lord, on our hearts and minds are many prayer requests for help, where we lift up David Raphael to you and his surgery that's going on tomorrow, as well as his daughter's healing from her recent surgery and her upcoming surgeries. Where we pray for the recovery of Nancy from her surgery, and we pray for the health of Eula and Jan's mother, who both suffer serious injuries from falling. Lord, we just pray that you would heal them and be with their families as they're serving and comforting them. It's in Jesus' name we pray all these things. Okay, everybody. For homework this week, we're supposed to look at Psalm 19, Psalm 139, and Job 3. If you didn't get to all three of them, that's okay. Did anybody get a chance to look at any of those and do some of the stuff that we were doing? Bobby did? Awesome. Yeah? Sarah? Sweet? Couple? Three?
I read them all.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So do we have any treasures that we found? Anything that, and it doesn't even have to be like a eureka, like I figured out what's going on here. It could just be like I noticed something crazy. These 6 verses all have this one word in different forms, something like that. Like, I don't know what's going on there, but something's going on here. Stuff like that's fun to look at. And maybe we'll all have an answer, maybe we won't. Alicia?
The groupings for Psalm 139.
Okay, so Psalm 139. What'd you find?
So I found that you said to group it based on the thought that was communicated in it.
Okay.
So at first I grouped 1 through 6, but then when I grouped 7 through 12 together and then 13 through 18 together, then I realized that 19 through 22 went together and 23 through 24. So then I put 1 and 2 together, 3 through 6, and they're all like equal verses, distance apart. Sorry, was that confusing?
A little bit. 3 through 6.
So I did 1 through 2 seemed to correspond with 23 through 24. And then 3 through 6 seemed to correspond with 19 through 22. And then 7 through 12 was parallel to 13 through 18.
Okay. So you notice some groupings of ideas all together in a set number of verses, and were you able to look at those in comparison to each other, how they related or anything like that?
Like 1 through 2 and 23 through 24 were pretty close.
Okay. So
But
that's called an ellipsis, right? When we have something at the front, something at the back that's catching our attention, that seems to repeat the same ideas or same kind of words.
And I think with that, I think the odd part of that one was, first he says, "You searched me," and then he said, "Search me." And so it almost seems like that's upside down from the way I would have written it would be, "Search me, well, you have searched me." But it's, so I was wondering about like
It ends with that appeal. What do you think might be going on there?
Well, so I think the part about the 21 and 22 played into that, because I think he hated, and I think he was fine, to me it seemed like he hated his enemies, and that made him feel like he needed to be searched for that or something. I think it has to play in with that, because all of this was God's goodness, and then something about hate right in the middle of that. That seemed a little bit strange to me.
Okay.
So I think it had to do with that, but I need to think about it more.
Okay. Anything else? Treasures brought up.
I went over Psalm 19, and I think I found a metonymy. And as I understand it, it's when you replace a word that's closely related to the other word. You just use a different word that kind of means the same thing. So verses 7 through 9, each line starts with, so it says, the law of the Lord, the statutes of the Lord, the precepts of the Lord, the commands of the Lord, the fear of the Lord, the decrees of the Lord. So would that be metonymy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
so
what you're referring.
all those things are acting as a metonymy for something, right?
Yeah.
And that's what this poem is exploring. What is that something that all these things
So the
relate
Lord's
to?
word and his voice. The first part is about the earth crying out his voice, and then next part is his law.
Yeah.
So
And then don't forget in verse 9, the Lord's fear and the Lord's
Yes.
judgment. And
yeah.
so all 6 of those ideas are meant to be smushed together, grouped, thought about. Awesome. All right, I'm taking myself off mute here, Carrie. Sorry. Excellent. So I got two bribes, treats, and I already got Alicia a copy this morning.
You brought my copy. It's okay. You brought me a copy.
So I am super pumped that you guys are looking at some of these things and starting to make a little bit of sense. I was talking to Alicia about it, and I don't know if she doesn't mind me sharing this, but she was talking about doing these things, and she told me, I think this is just like too high above me, like it's too difficult. And one encouragement that I had for her, and that I have for anybody that feels that way, is my kids feel the same way when I start teaching them some sort of new math, right? It's like, this is like multiplication, we just did addition, this is too far above me. It's like, no, it's not too far above you. This is just something new, something a little different. So your brain hasn't figured out how to do this kind of stuff. But once you learn multiplication tables, you never feel that way again, right? You have it all memorized. It's all easily brought back to mind. It's easily used. And so that's what all these exercises are meant to do, is to help us as students of the Word, to get into the Word in good ways. So today we're going to be looking at, I'm calling it phase 3 of our class, okay? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
So the Job one was really an interesting one, but so what I found was like, the first part was about darkness and death. but this, I think, was a lament of his to God. He's not happy, and it's a lament for him. And so the first part to verse, the first part was darkness and death, and then the second part was light and life. I think you see that in all those, but then what's the odd part is death is merciful and life is trouble.
Yeah.
Which is completely upside down for how we relate light and dark and death and life.
Yeah. So I think what you're seeing here is these are all still working within the stuff we were talking about in phase 1 with so this idea of heaven and earth, and then you have time, and then you have like a place within time. And so Job's place, all the work of his hands, his whole life's effort, the inheritance that he got from his father, and then built upon for life, all of that has been overturned, right? It's all been undone by this intermediate, but at the permission of God, right? And so now that everything's been flipped over, this is Job's lament, and we see all those inverted ideas that Bobby was just talking about. So I think that's a really good thing to notice, Bobby. So you earned your Starbucks card this week. Good job. But it's that inversion.
3, 4, 5, and 6 verses. 3, 4, 5, and 6.
In Job 3? Yeah, so.
No, in Psalm 139 is what I'm talking about.
Oh, Psalm 139? Let me look.
Even before a word is on my tongue, you know it, and, you know, he knows everything about us. You can't revive, you can't forget him.
Yep. Yeah, so I think 139 reflects on this idea that God is outside of heaven and earth, right? He's more than everything that he's created, but he also inhabits all that he's created as well. It's this big reflection on those things. Yeah. So I think this is just the worldview that they're working off of. So when we see that these ideas come up over and over again, we shouldn't be surprised. It should be hopeful because we have a better chance of understanding what the authors are saying, I think. Okay. So phase 3. Okay, so phase 1, we were talking about all that crazy symbolism stuff. And then in phase 2, we were talking about poetry, so that's what we just finished last week. And now phase 3, we're actually going to start into the minor prophets. So what I want to do is, for the rest of the class, I want to try and get through all the minor prophets. There's 12 of them. Some of them are very short, some of them are a little bit longer. I think we can get through the majority of them. I'm going to be preaching about Jonah today, so we don't have to do that one. If you pay attention, I'll be quizzing you later. No, I'm just kidding. Maybe. And so today we're going to look at Hosea. So what I want to try and do is get through the first 3 chapters of Hosea in class, and then give you the work of trying to figure out Hosea 3 through 11, kind of what's going on there this week. Okay? So that's going to be the homework. But to start off with, can somebody read Hosea 1 through 9? Actually, just read Hosea 1.
The word of the Lord came to Hosea, son of Beeri, during the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and during the reign of Jeroboam, son of Jehoash, king of Israel. When the Lord began to speak...
Let's pause there for a minute. Okay, so like most books of prophecy, we get a little bit of context as we start the book of prophecy. Hosea's message is going to be primarily directed towards Israel, the northern kingdom. Okay? So who is the king during this time in the northern kingdom?
Jeroboam.
And this is Jeroboam the second. So Jeroboam the first was the one who accepted the 10 tribes from the north after Solomon's death. So he kind of broke the kingdom in half. And then Jeroboam II is also not a good king. Well, there are no good kings in the northern kingdom, but Jeroboam II is especially bad. So this message is for Hosea lives during that time, and his message is in the context of that kingdom. Okay. All right, keep going. 2 through 9.
When the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, "Go, marry a promiscuous woman and have children with her. For like an adulterous wife, this land is guilty of unfaithfulness to the Lord." So he married Gomer, daughter of Diablam, and she conceived and bore him a son. Then the Lord said to Hosea, "Call him Jezreel, because I will soon punish the house of Jehu for the massacre at Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of Israel. In that day I will break Israel's bow in the valley of Jezreel." Gomer conceived again and gave birth to a daughter. Then the Lord said to Hosea, "Call her Lo Ruhamah, which means not love. For I will no longer show love to Israel, that I should at all forgive them. Yet I will show love to Judah, and I will save them, not by bow, sword, or battle, or by horses and horsemen, but I, the Lord their God, will save them." After she had weaned Lo Ruhamah, Gomer had another son. Then the Lord said, "Call him Lo Ammi, which means not my people. For you are not my people, and I am not your God."
Okay. So a few important ideas and symbols that are going to be key. So why do you think we get this story here at the beginning of this book of prophecy? Why do we get this little narrative about Hosea and his wife Gomer?
Well, from the Lamplighters, one of the things they talk about in there is that the prophets had visual representations of their messages. So I assume, his Hosea's prophecy, that'll kind of set up the lens with which we should view it, I guess, from his what God had him do.
Very good. So we call those sign acts in Lamplighters. They're these visual representations of the prophetic word from God to reinforce the message. So here, the sign act is that God tells Hosea to go marry a prostitute, to go marry a promiscuous woman. Clayton's translation said. Okay, so we need to understand symbolically, I think, what's going on before we try to tackle the rest of it, or else it might not connect. So if we think about a family tree, okay, or maybe just a family in ancient times, you can think of it as a hierarchy, okay. And so the head of the family is the male, the oldest male, okay? So in this case, it's Hosea. And why would you not want to have a promiscuous woman as your wife when it comes to building up your family?
You would never know if the child was his.
Yeah. I think we've talked about this before. But yeah, so the problem with having a woman that has slept with more than one man is that you don't know whose children are whose, right? So is this Hosea's children? Is it Judah's children? We don't know. And so there's this kind of unknown, right? And it becomes difficult to bring that person into the structure of society, okay? Because there's confusion, there's chaos. So instead of building up a solid place, a solid family, it's more of this idea of chaos, right? Bringing chaos into an orderly system. Now we have confusion and unknown parentage, if that makes sense. Okay, so that's how this fits into this idea. It's this idea of harlotry or prostitution. It's problematic morally, and that's connected to this idea of unknown parentage. Okay. Anybody have any questions about that topic, about that concept? Does that make sense? Okay, so now, the thing that Clayton said I thought was really good was he said we should then view the whole prophetic message through this lens that has been presented to us on page 1. I think it's a really good way to think about reading the Bible. You start a new book, the first chapter or 2 are going to set up the rest of the book to help you understand how to read the book. Okay, so how does this message apply to the Israelites? We're going to explore that, but what's the basic idea? What's the basic? I think God actually says it in chapter 2 or verse 2 there. Somebody besides
It's
Clayton.
chaos, isn't it?
What's that?
Isn't it gonna be chaos?
What's going to be chaos?
The land that Hosea and the Israelites.
Yeah. Okay, keep going.
Oh, well, that's,
It's going to be chaos for what reason?
well, nobody knows who the other is, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is so one of the things we learned about was how these symbolic ideas work on like a interpersonal level, but if you expand them out to like a national level, they work there too. Okay. So instead of Hosea, who's the head of Israel's family?
God.
Yeah, God's the king, right? Yahweh. Just an H. Don't misspell God's name. But there's also Baal's family, right? And there's Dagon's family. There's all these other gods that are vying for Israel, the wife. Okay? So if Israel is unfaithful and she's going to go commit prostitution with another god, with another deity, then what does she produce? It's the chaos, right? It's this chaotic situation. We don't know, the children of this union are going to be loyal to Baal. Are they going to be loyal to Yahweh? We don't know. And so that's the lens that we're to be viewing this whole book through. Okay. The other 3 ideas that are going to be really important are the names of these children. Okay. So let's go through each one. So Jezreel, is that a boy or a girl?
Boy.
Okay. And he's named Jezreel because there's this slaughter. Jehu slaughtered all these people at Jezreel, and God was going to bring vengeance on Israel. Okay. So it's this significant event that happened. God's going to bring vengeance, and so he has to name this child. And it's interesting how he talks about each child as well. Okay, what's the normal formula when a husband and a wife get pregnant and have a child in the Bible? What's that normally sound like? Adam knew his wife Eve. She conceived and bore a son named Seth. Right. That's the formula. So the man knew his wife. She conceived, bore a son. What's the formula here in Hosea?
It says, so he married Gomer, and she conceived and bore him a son.
Okay. Yeah. So it skips the knowing, right? Because if Gomer's a prostitute, then we don't know. There is no knowing. There's this confusion. Okay. So we have Jezreel, who is the daughter or who is the son of Gomer. That's how he's identified as well. And then she conceived again, verse 6. She conceived again and gave birth to a daughter. Named her Lo Ruhamah, which means no compassion. Okay, so no compassion on Israel is the idea. And then she conceived, right? So verse 8, when she had weaned Lo Ruhamah, she conceived and gave birth to a son. Named him Lo Ami. You're not my people. Okay. So yeah.
Is that what low means?
Yeah, so lo means not, okay? And then the word after that. So it's like we use the a prefix or the d or something like that. So that's how it works. Which is going to be important to remember. Okay, then we get some lines of poetry. Your translation might not have verses 10 and 11 as like a poetic thing, but a lot of translations do. So let's read that, keeping all the things we just talked about in mind. Can somebody read verses 10 and 11?
Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, it shall be said to them, children of the living God. And the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together, and they shall appoint for themselves one head, and they shall go up from the land, for great shall be the day of judgment.
Okay. Is that what you were expecting after Hosea's kids? Their names? You said no, why not?
I mean, it's almost an antithesis to it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so this is like the opposite of what we would expect, okay? Verse 10, does that ring any bells? When you hear a line like that, they'll be like the sand of the sea, cannot be numbered.
Abraham.
Yeah, the promise back to Abraham, and so it's connecting this. So what's going on here? So we get these things. So Jezreel, the way that I'm going to think about that, and I suggest you do, is that this is the day of the Lord. Okay, this is judgment for a heinous act that's going to come swiftly and destructively. This is Jezreel. And then you have lo. I'm going to just put an R because I'm not going to try and spell it. But lo R is no compassion. And then lo A is not my people. So if the day of the Lord's coming, I'm going to have no compassion because these are not my people. Yet, so that's what verse 10, that's what my version starts with in verse 10. Yet, I'm still going to be true to my promises to Abraham. Okay? Do you see what's going on here? It's smushing this whole book into this first chapter, helping us understand the framework that we're going to work under. And so in verse 10, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8 lines there, which are 4 pairs, 4 verses, like we've been talking about, poetic verses. And so the last 4 lines of 10 says, where it is said, you are not my people, it will be said to them, you are sons of the living God, or you are children of the living God. Okay? So we see how we start up front with this reality. Okay? Israel has broken faith. They have prostituted themselves. They've done all these terrible things, so I won't have compassion, and they're not my people. And yet, I'm going to take the one that is the stranger, the unknown, and they're going to be brought into the family. They're going to be sons of the living God. Okay? And then the next verse, the sons of Judah and the sons of Israel will be gathered together. If you're Jeroboam II, do you like that message? Why not?
It's for the kingdoms. This is mine.
Yeah. I mean, maybe if I could be the king,
Sure.
that's cool. But that probably isn't on Hosea's to-do list, is to appoint me the king of the United Kingdom. They're going to appoint for themselves one leader. They will go up from the land. For great will be the day of Jezreel. Okay. And so it's this whole, it's this inversion. It's saying that Jezreel it starts out, this is going to be bad, but then it ends by saying this thing that's going to happen is going to unite the kingdom, He's going to bring all these strangers into the family of God, and we're going to look back on this and say, this is the day of the Lord, and it was great. It was a good thing. Any questions about chapter 1? Does that all make sense? Okay, so now what we're going to do is last 10 minutes or so of class is I want to look at chapter 2, and I want us to do the same process, okay? Do the same process with chapter 2, and let's try and figure out what's going on here. I'm going to try and give you a few less hints, because I want you guys to engage your brain. And I think if this goes well, you're going to be a little bit excited to figure out what's going on in chapter 3 and beyond, for reasons I'll show you here in a minute. So chapter 2, verse 1, say to your brothers, Ami, and to your sisters, Ruhama. Who's that? Who's he talking to there?
So, say to your brothers, my people, and so it's the two kids' names.
Okay.
And so, I don't know, because looking at I know the quotation marks are not necessarily always the best explanation, because didn't they not have quotation marks or something like that?
Right, those are all added by our translators.
Yes, so, because when you look at it, it looks like it's the same conversation, like starting in verse 8, where God says, this is what he named this child, and then he continues on with verse 10, the rest of chapter 1, and it looks like it just continues on.
Okay.
But if you just take it at the words of say of your brothers, my people, and to your sisters, my loved one, I don't know, it almost sounds like Hosea saying that to his children, or something like that.
Okay, one possibility. Any other ideas? Who has a brother named Lo-Ami and Ruhama? Her sister.
The other kid,
What's his name?
Jezreel.
Jezreel. Okay. And that's the last person mentioned in verse 11. Okay. So what's this instruction saying before we go into the poem?
That they were named something at birth, but now God is telling them to call them the opposite.
Yeah.
They're named negative, now we're going to call them positive.
Perfect. Okay, so for this little messed up family, we have this situation where we have these 3 kids that are all unknowns, and they've been named that way intentionally to represent the larger thing that's going on with Israel. Okay, and so then he says, no, Jezreel, this is going to be great. Name them Ami, name them Ruhama. So we're going to bring them into my family. And so what's that mean for Israel as a whole?
It's fulfilling the promise of Abraham, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, so now let's keep going. Contend with your mother, contend, for she is not my wife, and I am not her husband. Let her put away her harlotry from her face, or her adultery from between her breasts. So who's the mother?
Promiscuous woman.
Yeah, so Gomer, right? And who else?
Israel.
Yeah, it's Israel, right? So it's working on both levels at the same time. You have these strange children, Gomer. You have Israel and her strange children. Okay? And so now this message is from Hosea, but it's also from Yahweh, right? That's kind of the cool thing about this book is is the whole thing is working on two levels at the same time. So Hosea is telling his children, contend with your mother, contend, for she is not my wife, and I'm not her husband. Let her put away her harlotry. So if we have this idea from Hosea, that makes sense in one level. And if Yahweh is saying it, contend with your mother, contend, for she is not my wife, and I'm not her husband. How does that work on the Israel's level? Who's he talking to, and
God talking to Israel as Hosea was talking to Gomer.
so we were talking about the mother being Israel, right? So who is, when he says contend with your mother, who's he talking to? Yeah, the people of Israel, right? So Israel as a whole, and then the people of Israel, the children of Israel, right? Yeah. Or I'll strip her naked and expose her as on the day when she was born. I will also make her like a wilderness, make her like a desert land, and slay her with thirst. Also, I'll take no pity on her children, because they are children of infidelity. For their mother has committed prostitution. She who conceived them has acted shamefully. For she said, I will go after my lovers, who give me bread and my water, my wool and my flax, my oil and my drink. Therefore, behold, I will obstruct her with thorns, and I will build a stone wall against her so she cannot find her paths. And she will pursue her lovers, but she will not reach them. She will seek them, but she will not find them. Then she will say, I will go back to my first husband, because it was better for me then than now. Yet she does not know that it was I myself who gave her the grain, new wine, and the oil, and lavished on her gold, silver and gold, which they used for Baal. Okay, so do we see how these things are working in parallel? And sometimes we kind of slip into more God's perspective, and sometimes it slips into the husband-wife metaphor. They're both working in parallel there. Anything that you notice in these verses that we want to point out?
I thought it was interesting. In verse 5, she said, I will go after my lovers who gave me my bread, my water, my wool, my flax, my oil, and my drink. It's very reminiscent of humanity, right? It's very reminiscent of humanity. Her wants and her needs there are very carnal, right? And it's usually that sort of stuff that leads humanity and individuals away, right? Because they want to fulfill those carnal desires. And then it's interesting that, you know, she and Israel and we seek other things to fulfill those carnal needs. But then as we see later on down there, it's, you know, God is saying, I've been fulfilling those needs for you this whole time. And so not only do we sin because we want to fulfill those carnal needs, we're blind to the fact that God has already been fulfilling those needs.
Yeah, it's a lack of trust in God's story, trust in his providence and what he's doing. So it's turning away from him to these other things. We feel like the things, you know, that we get when we do that are beneficial to us, and so we keep pursuing that. And he says, you know, it was all for me the whole time. And so then we kind of have this pivot, verse 9, therefore I will take back my grain at harvest time, my new wine in its seasons. I'll take away my wool, my flax that I gave to cover her nakedness. So now I will uncover her lewdness before the eyes of her lovers, and no one will rescue her from my hand. I will also put an end to all her joy, her feasts, her new moons, her Sabbaths, and all her festivals. Okay, so again, we're going back and forth between this human level where she's was covered by flax, right, which is the material that you use to make your clothing, and cotton as well. And now we're shifting back to this idea of the feasts and the Sabbaths, right? So this is Israel language, And I'll destroy her vines and fig trees, of which she said, they are my wages for prostitution, which my lovers have given me. And I'll turn them into a forest, and the animals of the field will devour them. So I know Bobby has a really big garden in his backyard. Does anybody else garden? Somewhat, yeah. Bobby's house is interesting because he doesn't have a fence, and so deer can kind of come into his backyard, and they do often because we live near kind of a large forest area. And so if you didn't put up a wall around your garden, then you wouldn't have a lot of garden left, right? And so that's what's going on here is there's this two conflicting images. You have this walled garden, and then you have the wilderness. And so if you plant stuff out in the wilderness, it just gets eaten up, right?
I think this whole picture is really interesting because one of the things we know about adultery and the law was that an adulterous woman would be stoned. That would be the end. But we see something about the character of God in this. I think that it wasn't Gomer's purpose for having her go through all of this to be rid of her, but it was all the steps that he was trying to take to draw her back.
Yep.
And I think you lay that on top of God could have just been rid of Israel, and that was their just punishment. But instead he's trying to draw them back.
Yep.
And
Yeah, it's this very strange kind of poem where I want you back even though you've been unfaithful, right? And so I think that's what's going on. And so we start out with this hope that this is going to be okay, but that's going to prep us to go through all the rest of this prophecy because it's a hard thing to hear. We're out of time. Couple more things I want to draw your attention to. Verse 16, it'll come about on that day, declares the Lord, that you will call me my husband and no longer call me my Baal. And so Baal is a foreign god, but Baal also just means Lord or master. And so it's this word play that's going on there. And then, okay, we'll wrap it up. Verse 22, and the earth will respond to the grain, to the new wine, to the oil, and they'll respond to Jezreel. I will sow her for myself in the land. I will have compassion on her who had not obtained compassion, and I will say to those who were not my people, you are my people, and they will say, you are my God. So again, we're at the end here, we're again returning to this bringing in, this people that were unfaithful, this forgiveness and this drawing in. And then chapter 3, it's a very short chapter, not in poetry, and we get this whole new narrative structure. The Lord said to me, go again, love a woman who is loved by her husband, yet adulterous, even as the Lord loves the sons of Israel, though they turn to other gods and love raisin cakes. So I bought her for myself for 15 shekels and a homer and a half of barley, and I said to her, you shall stay with me for many days, you shall not play the harlot. Okay, so we have this whole new thing that's going on. So why do you think we get something like this in chapter 3? What was the purpose of the narrative in chapter 1? Yeah, it was to help us understand what the whole book was about, give us that lens. So what's going on here in chapter 3?
It's gonna paint the picture for the next part of the prophecy.
Exactly, yeah. It's gonna set us up for a different frame. It's gonna adjust it a little bit, help us look at a few different key words, key ideas, change some of the things. So it doesn't mention the children here. It doesn't mention those other things. It's saying let's look at it from this way, okay? And now we can read the rest of these chapters. Okay. So this week, that's your homework. Look at chapter 3, read that again a few times, and then start tackling the subsequent chapters based on what you know about chapter 1 and about chapter 3, and see how they're going to interact, they're going to work together, they're going to sometimes drop one and just use the other. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Awesome. Thank you all. Have a great day.